In this video, we're going to take a look back at the now 2 years old PC versions of the Final Fantasy Pixel Remasters and cover patch updates, corrections from the prior port reviews, and additional info including better coverage of Final Fantasy IV The After Years, as well as some modding potential for the games. We'll then take a look at what's changed in the console versions of the Pixel Remasters, so if you're interested in how the console versions are, feel free to skip ahead because that part of the video is only 5 minutes long. The rest of the video is really an addendum to the prior 6 port reviews, so they may be worth watching first to understand the context. So starting with the updates, across all games there's now flashing for critical hits, reduced transition time when fleeing, auto attacks won't repeat row switching, the minimap stays between screen transitions, and the cursor defaults to yes at ends now. All of the games saw many bug fixes too, mostly with soft locks. Final Fantasy V and VI had the most, and we'll cover bug fixes as we go. There are 2 prominent visual issues in every version of the Pixel Remasters, including the new console versions. There's improperly interpolated movement animations, mostly visible in 5 and 6 since they're so cutscene heavy, resulting in stuttering movements, or camera pans that don't look smooth like the example here, and then we have overall frame rate hitching that occurs on and off. If you still aren't seeing it, follow the roof of this building carefully. The game always reports that it's 60, but when we analyze it, we can tell that's not the case. It kinda seems like there's 2 causes to this, so we have 2 solutions that have to work together. So how we mitigate this is number 1, in the NVIDIA control panel or AMD equivalent, enable VSync and triple buffering, and number 2, use Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster tool to change your movement speed to 60 pixels. Both of these things combined help tremendously if it bothers you. Now let's go game by game. In Final Fantasy I, like Final Fantasy II, when it comes to enemy AI, when an enemy is going to cast a spell or use an ability, they'll do so in a fixed order of their spells or abilities. In the Pixel Remaster, which spells or abilities are used is based on probability. Additionally, an enemy's chance to flee is now a set value instead of based on your level. Because they're set, the fear spell actually doesn't do anything now. For Final Fantasy II, we reported how physical attacks from Malboros, Devil Blooms, and Antlions, and even Corals, who specifically are capable of instant KO, would always inflict their respective ailments and bypass immunity. This also extended to your own weapons that inflicted ailments. All of this was patched though. It was also a bug for dual-wielding characters to attack a different enemy if the first attack killed the first target, so that's been patched too. So far, everything we talked about has been updates and corrections for the Pixel Remasters, but for Final Fantasy III's DS version, enemies gain new abilities such as Titan as Flare, Leviathan as Blizzaga, Haste, and Protect, which are still retained in the Pixel Remasters. Now back to the Pixel Remaster version, here's a few extra notes. Stone Party members gain XP, pressing B while flying puts you back in the airship, L2 is used to talk to guest characters, Sight and Gnomish Bread show you more locations than normal, including places you can't go back to, waterfalls were visually tweaked, Sage's MP growth is identical to the 3D versions except for level 7 and 8, while curative potency also remains as high as DS. And Reflect doesn't work on Bahamut's Mega Flare anymore. In Final Fantasy IV, Rydia's Chocobo summon was in the SNES version. It was our Cockatree summon that was removed. The PS1 version of Final Fantasy IV has prevalent flashing issues when played on PS3. I'm sure I saw this issue originally and I just thought it was my own copy. Starting at DS, enemies are more aggressive and some have new abilities such as Helldivers who can gradually petrify now. So since Naming Way can't rename you anymore, he has a side quest chain throughout the game which gives you maps to fill out, the Bestiary, Event Theater, Music Box, and augments such as disable enemy encounters or boost the chance of enemies dropping rare items. That augment alongside being able to buy sirens makes grinding rare drops in this version more efficient. We had mentioned all these things separately, but they are in fact connected. Final Fantasy IV's Pixel Remaster received updates that affect balance. Originally, the Pixel Remaster halved how much experience you needed to level up, and to compensate for that, encounter rates were reduced. However, the halved XP still made the game easier than prior versions, so to compensate further, enemy XP was reduced in an update. Additionally, updates not only increased the drop rate of enemies' 4th slot drops, which are their rarest drops, but summoning items in the pink tail were swapped to the 3rd slot, making them a little easier to get. You can also now buy sirens. Flying enemies also now properly float. We went through Final Fantasy IV the After Years 3D version too quickly before and ended up missing very critical info. The biggest thing is that the challenge dungeons for everyone were cut entirely and their rewards can just be bought in the final chapter. Remember, their purpose was to give the chapters replayability since they had to kill time until the next episodic release of this mobile game. With this change, the final dungeon was significantly shortened from 29 floors to 13, with the bosses from the prior Final Fantasy titles removed. This final dungeon was notorious for its length, lasting way longer than any regular chapter in the game, so while we are cutting content, we're also gutting a good chunk of filler. You can now leave the final dungeon, whereas before you were permanently stuck there until you finished it. The Eblon 4 as well as 2 characters from Rydia's Tale aren't missable party members anymore. This is the required party to keep the other potentially missable character too. Summons can't be accidentally killed and missed as long as you got Rydia in the party, the level limits per chapter were removed, and New Game Plus was added. In Final Fantasy V, originally you could use the Break Spellblade with Rapid Fire to efficiently instantly kill enemies because Rapid Fire wouldn't waste hits on enemies it already hit, but this was fixed in GBA onward. The first mobile version of FF5, contrary to what I said, does actually have controller support, and the Kaiser Knuckles specifically don't boost the power of kick like it does in every other version. Now in the Pixel Remaster, some locations that changed appearance in the third world now stayed the same, and Sword Dance and Focus now deal full damage from the back row. And Magista now forcefully takes the turn to summon Forza when she's at half HP, where before she would wait for her turn to summon Forza, which meant it would be possible for you to kill her before Forza was even summoned. Updated in patches, Gogo's bestiary entry can't be missed if you waited the battle out, Sinewy Etude correctly requires 7 piano plays now, captured monsters are now retained when a party member leaves, an exploit for infinite Gil from the Gil Cave was fixed, X-Death is once again susceptible to level 2 ult, which also means you can hit him with level 5 death again, and the Brave Blade, which loses attack power based on how many times you fled in your playthrough, now actually regains power after winning a set number of battles. Additionally, prior to the Pixel Remaster, the Chicken Knife's 25% chance to proc Scram could be overwritten by using another skill, such as the Twin Lance, Mug, or Counter. Twin Lance still doesn't work in the Pixel Remaster, but Mug and Counter do once again stop fleeing thanks to updates. Water was also visually adjusted to add variety to the appearance of different bodies of water. Then lastly, we have Final Fantasy VI. With no Final Fantasy Chronicles on PS1 in PAL territories, the Final Fantasy Anthology included 4 and 5 instead of 5 and 6 over there. Final Fantasy VI released on PS1 standalone, and they didn't get Chrono Trigger until the DS. In the Pixel Remaster, you can't kill Undead Behemoth King instantly anymore, the Imperial Palace sequence can be ended manually, and another exit was added to the middle of the Phoenix Cave. Sabin's diagonal inputs could always be substituted with either cardinal input, but new to the Pixel Remaster, it also offers the opposite. Cardinal inputs can be substituted with diagonal inputs. So the Curse Shield turns into a Paladin Shield after 256 battles, but has some caveats as to which battles count. In the Pixel Remaster, battles no longer need to yield magic AP, so Gogo is allowed to wear it, the wearer doesn't need to stay alive, and you're allowed to flee or be ejected from the fight. However, battles at the Cultist Tower do not apply, so you can't utilize the magic urn fights. Visually, subtle Rorschach illusions were removed, and the Magitech research facility was updated to make it significantly easier to navigate. Patches for the Pixel Remaster fixed a bug with using espers you didn't have yet, buffed Odin with a +2 speed on level up instead of +1, buffed Quetzali with a +1 speed instead of no bonus, so that you will always have an esper that gives you a speed buff after upgrading Odin, and corrected rare item steal chances. Patches also gave us updated sprites for the party, added an extra Mode 7-esque perspective option for riding chocobos, and restored the original game over sequence. Now let's talk about mods real quick. Remember that we talked about that 3DS port of Final Fantasy 1 that was only in Japanese? There is a patch now for it that brings in the PSP translation. It's got issues, but it is fully playable. The 3D version of Final Fantasy 3 on PC has a handful of mods for things like fonts, music, PS5 button icons, updated summon names, and better item descriptions. Final Fantasy IV's 3D PC port also sports mods for music, fonts, cleaner text assets, undubbing, and minor fixes.
部隊長、次期バロンに到着します。ああ。やはり部隊長も。
Final Fantasy V's old PC port, being a mobile game port, has mods for visuals and audio that are inspired from its other versions, from Super Nintendo to GBA to the Pixel Remaster, or just try to improve what this version attempted. First and foremost is removing the bilinear filtering, but then we've got OSTs, fonts, UI palettes, portraits, and even a PSP-inspired sprite overhaul. Kudos to the modding community for doing what they can to salvage the look of this version. We already talked about this in the port review, but this is a reminder that Final Fantasy VI's old PC port has a great mod installer known as Atma Weapon that walks you through installing assets from SNES to GBA to remastered. There's also Brave Exvius sprite mods as well that offer a look that beats out this version's vanilla look. Lastly, for the Pixel Remasters, the mod scenes have developed and we've got great mods for sprites, fonts, assets, UI, gamma correction for assets pulled from the GBA, and music. For each Pixel Remaster, in their Guides tab on Steam, there will be a guide on modding them that walks you through the steps and highlights what you might be interested in. Now, Fumi Takuma, director of the console versions, first worked on the games midway through their development on PC. The changes reflect fan, staff, and his own feedback, which he was already taking notes on before he was director. Now, Fumi wants to bring the changes to the PC and mobile versions, though due to the lower spec phone requirements, not all features may make it into the mobile update. So, till those versions are updated, let's cover these console versions. The bestiary can now be accessed from the in-game menu and lets you fight enemies similarly to the AR mode in the mobile version. Every game now has a toggle to disable random encounters, a default movement speed option, and XP and gil multipliers that can be set as high as 4 and as low as 0, letting you make the games more challenging. Some games have their own specific multipliers too. In Final Fantasy II, there's multipliers for weapon, magic, and stat XP. There's also compensatory HP. Remember that in the original version, HP was increased by losing HP, but starting at GBA, you also gained HP for every 10 battles a character lives through to discourage the taught behavior that you need to hit yourself to play Final Fantasy II. Takuma notes that due to how many enemies deal damage based on your HP, this actually made some enemies harder than intended, which is true. He's more specifically talking about undead enemies and a handful of others that you run into late game that do bonus damage that ignores defense. So this option lets you disable gaining HP gains every 10 battles. Does this mean you need to hit yourself to gain HP again? Personally, I'd say no, because for the threshold of when you gain HP, before would add from the difference between current HP and max HP, while the Pixel Remaster simply tracks how much HP or MP you lost over the course of battle, so the pace at which enemies deal damage to you is an acceptable flow to your gains. That being said, it is optional for a reason, and the default is set to on, so if you're unsure, you could just leave it there. Final Fantasy V, meanwhile, has a multiplier for ABP, letting you master jobs faster, and Final Fantasy VI then lets you multiply magic AP, helping you master espers faster. You can pause in battle now and return to the title screen. This is noteworthy since Final Fantasy V and VI only let you steal one item off each enemy per battle, whether it's the rare or common steal, so this lets you soft reset and try again faster, unless you're on Switch, which has longer load times. And for Final Fantasies 4 through 6, Defend and Row in the Pixel Remasters were originally put in the directional menu together, but this new version separates them so you can get to them faster like in the original games. The biggest visual change to the Pixel Remasters on consoles is the new pixel font option. It was made from scratch and inspired by FF5. We may also see it return in future Square Enix ports and remasters. Additionally, there's new and returning animations and effect updates such as for Kane's Jump, Final Fantasy II's final boss, and Strago's lorecast, job name labels for Final Fantasy 3 and 5, and unique loading icons for each game. Between the platforms, the PS5 is flawless, though loading on Switch can take longer. This alone isn't really a deal breaker though, with portability being a factor. What I find a little more annoying is occasional minor hitching that happens when loading into the game, or when selecting options in battle, which becomes more noticeable in 4 when you have 5 characters. The PS4 version also has this, but to a far less degree, and its load times are closer to PS5 than to Switch. You can now choose between the new OSTs and the original tracks. And remember that Final Fantasy 1 and 2 on WonderSwan Color added new scenes and music that have since carried over all the way to the Pixel Remaster, so those tracks actually have new 8-bit versions. The save sound effect was also updated. The timing of music in some scenes were tweaked too. Some specific examples are Final Fantasy III's final boss, Final Fantasy VI's final boss where the original SNES version's seamless music transitions that weren't in any other version were restored, or in 4 when Edge confronts Rubicante. In Final Fantasy II, the magic interference stat on equipment is now shown for the first time. Additionally, key phrases that you can use for a character in conversation are highlighted red. Then, in Final Fantasy VI, the opening credits were restored using stat from the remaster, starting with those involved in both the original and the remaster. Deathgaze now shows up in the overworld instead of being invisible, so you don't have to fly over the entire map tediously to find him. Additionally, you can rename Cyan's Bushido techniques even in English, and Ultima Weapon and Ultima Buster have differently colored field sprites. Ultimately, the updates to the PC version so far do address a number of issues since launch, but I did expect the console versions to come to PC by this point, but they haven't. Hopefully this video will enact a curse and we'll see the PC versions updated sometime soon. Speaking of, stay tuned to this channel for more on Persona 3. Also, yeah, the other big takeaway today is that the 3D version of the After Years offers a less padded and more convenient gameplay experience. Though if you do want that content, the 2D version is there. But for now, that's all I've got, so if you want more port reviews, be sure to like and subscribe. This year, we still have Baten Kaitos, Super Mario RPG, and Star Ocean 2, as well as Front Mission 2. We won't be able to cover all of those by the end of the year, but I'll do what I can. So until next time, thanks for watching.